Take command. That's Logan Paulson. I am Craig Hoffman. This offense, Logan, did put up 27 points on a very, very good Pittsburgh Steelers defense. They put up 17 in the first half, but they ultimately slowed down in the second. And it just was a frustrating offensive tape to watch for me. What about for you? What stood out? Like, what's your, as you put the tape down eventually, like what's the top line of your notes, if you will?
Yeah, so usually, you come out and it's the simplest thing that is the reason why something wasn't good. And they just, to me, in this game had too many negative plays. So literally negative yardage plays. I think this is the most negative yardage plays they've had all season, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's something, I think they had 9 in this game or something like that, and they had 52 all season.
Yeah,
I think was the number.
Yeah, so obviously that's a huge thing. So that's sacks, that's rushing efficiency. Also, I think the other thing that sticks out to me is there was just too many, drops, kind of near misses in terms of the passing game. And while this offense is very talented and very good, it's the same thing with the defense. Against a more talented opponent, you can't miss on those. You can't miss those opportunities. And I'm not saying anything that Jayden Daniels or Dan Quinn or Kliff Kingsbury doesn't know. And probably a lot of the fans know that too. But you got to give, and we're going to talk about this more in more detail, but you got to give credit to Pittsburgh because of how quickly they played, the game plan they came up with. They really changed a lot of what they did to kind of affect Jayden Daniels. So kudos to them. But in a game like this, every single play is important, and there just were too many, what I would say is negative or neutral plays that didn't help you kind of progress the offense down the field.
Yeah, I think that a couple of things that you bring up there that are worth fleshing out a little bit. One that I'll circle back to in a second is Pittsburgh changing it up, because Jayden was asked after the game directly, did they do anything different? He was like, no, it's what we expected. And I feel like players say that in part because they don't want to, it feels like, it was crazy, or coach didn't tell us any of this stuff was going to happen. Then you're kind of throwing your coach under the bus, or it can be perceived that way, even though it's not actually throwing your coach under the bus. Everyone watches the tape. The tape was the tape. You can anticipate maybe some changes, but Pittsburgh really did, especially in the first half, I feel like, bring a little bit more pressure and do some interesting things that they don't typically do. So I feel like, well, actually, let's just start there. Let's just start with that in terms of the schematic and maybe even not even schematic, but play calling differences of the Pittsburgh that played Washington versus what they had shown on tape.
Yeah, so I agree with Jayden to a certain extent. They played cover 3 and they played man, which is what they do all the time. They are a man cover 3 team, and they're going to stop the run. That's what at their core, that's who they are. I think the thing that sticks out to me is just they were in more 5-man pressures than they've been in all year. They were kind of hey, we're going to stop the run and we're going to bring pressures. And in passing situations, obviously they get into their 4-man rush structures, which were very, very effective. And we talked about that post game. Watching those 4 guys rush the passer was fun for me to watch as a fan of football. They're on the same page. Cam Hayward, what is he in year 14 or 15?
I think it's actually year 753.
Dude, and he looks like he's an amazing football player. His power, his strength, his read and react ability. Obviously, TJ Watt. Highsmith is a guy that does not get enough credit, man. He's awesome. Really good football player. And then Keanu Benton was excellent. So that front was excellent. But in terms of just we're gonna play kind of our odd structure, which they don't do a ton of. We're gonna play our odd structure. We're gonna rush 5, and we're gonna really put Jayden in the heater in a way that we haven't done prior to this year. I think they had the lowest blitz percentage in the NFL coming into this game, and so for them to bring 19 5-man rushes in this game is statistically way higher than it would normally be. But in terms of the coverage structure, the man, the cover 3, the aggressive press on the outside, that's who they are. But I'm saying in terms of maybe a better way to put it, in terms of how they applied it with the pressure stuff, that's maybe a little bit different.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. Just the couple of slight changes were good, and it also created matchups. Because the other thing with Pittsburgh is Robert Mays had this stat on the Athletic Football Show. They not led. What's the opposite? They're worst in the league of unblocked pressures, right?
Yes.
In terms of generating free runners, they only had 5 coming into the game. 5, because they don't blitz like that.
Yeah.
But it's not like they're last in the league in pressures. They just don't get free runners in the way that other teams do, where they kind of sell out. And it's, the Commanders get a decent amount of those where they're able to get someone free and just, come in. And, something we didn't even talk about with the defense, like some of the key penalties, like Shin had that roughing call, like it's an unblocked pressure. Unfortunately, it ends poorly for Washington. But like the way Pittsburgh gets pressure is they kick your ass. Like the tackles in this game, and we'll talk about the run game a little bit more here in a second. And I think that's where Trent Scott showed up a little bit more, and not necessarily in a great way, where it's like, yeah, this guy's a fourth tackle and you're going to have to do the best you can. But for as great as Brandon Coleman was 2 weeks ago, he had a really tough time with Alex Highsmith. It was like Alex Highsmith is a veteran, excellent player, and he saw a rookie and he was matched up with him one-on-one a ton, and he just bullied him, because that's what happens sometimes to rookies in the NFL. It doesn't make me change my long-term purview on Brandon Coleman, but like dude's falling all over the place, getting bull rushed, missed assignments, all of it. And Pittsburgh had a really good plan. Again, not necessarily to just get free runners everywhere, but to create the matchups they want that they knew they could win, and then they went and won them.
No, I think that's 100% right. And I think we talked about it post-game, talked about it now. They're a good defense, and they played like a good defense, and they played like a Steelers defense. And like there's this cultural weight, like when you play Pittsburgh, when you play Baltimore, like as a former player, like it was the same thing. You go into Baltimore or go into Pittsburgh, and it's going to be like a mouthpiece chin strap, like it's going to be a 4-round heavyweight fight. And that's just how they've always been. And so kudos to Mike Tomlin for cultivating that culture. And then couple that with a guy who understands defense at a high level. Like you're going to get a tough matchup for the offense. And it did feel like, just watching on the field, that it felt a little bit like a playoff game, is what it felt like to me when I was watching on the sideline. It just had a little bit more juice. And I think I don't know. No one would ever admit this, but I think maybe that just little slight uptick in intensity, is maybe why Brandon Coleman struggles a little bit, because it's not like there's certain times he knows what to do. It's just he's not doing it fast enough. He's not doing it with enough urgency. The slight incompletions that Jayden's got in the game, like just a little bit geeked up. The windows are a little bit tighter. The defensive line's compressing that pocket a little bit more. And that's kind of what it felt like to me, and it just felt like there was just a little uptick, and everyone was even like Luke McCaffrey. Like I haven't seen Luke drop a ball since he's been here. And he drops that one on the sideline. You know what I mean? Like, which is kind of like it's a late throw.
You think that was a drop or versus a PBU?
So when you slow it down, like I went back and watched it, like it's ball right through his hands, hits him in the chest, and the receiver punches through. Yeah. So again, like that's one where you're like, man, like he doesn't do that usually. And then Zach, like when was the last time you saw Zach like drop a ball ever?
Hit him in the chest.
And so like brutal. He never does that. And I think it's just there was a slight. Like it was just a little bit more urgent. I've been a part of teams where we're kind of punching above our weight, and that extra little bit of urgency, like it was subconscious, right? But you miss some stuff. And that's to me, and again, maybe I'm projecting based on my past experience, which is probably exactly what I'm doing. But like that's what it felt like to me, watching the bench, watching the field. And this is good because ultimately you learn from this and you say, we do have another gear. We can get there. And like, how do we make sure we're ready for these big games? Because there's a big one coming up on Thursday. Like, I bet you this team will feel that and be ready to go because they've just done it.
Yeah, I think whether it's the subconscious adrenaline, if you will, that you're talking about, or just the task is a little bit harder. There's a little more weight on the bar, if you will.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Whether it is subconscious, mental, whether it is truly physically just more difficult, like they were definitely sped up in a way that they have not been basically since Tampa, even in their losses, even against Baltimore. Like it didn't feel out of control. It's just like they had guys who made plays and, whatever. This felt a little bit sped up. And by the way, they scored more points in this game than they did against Baltimore. So they did it or found ways in a lot of ways, but the consistency down in, down out was not there in the same way. And had it been, they probably scored 40 in this game because there are definitely some missed opportunities that we can get to here in a second. Just real quick before I lose this train of thought, then I want to talk about the run game. Although these things go together, I think to a point. Like, man, not just the guys that you've already mentioned, like some of the players on this defense. One, Patrick Queen had the game of the year for him. He has not had a good year. That is easily. I was talking with Brooke Pryor, who I had on the show last week, ESPN's reporter for the Steelers. Afterwards, yesterday we were texting, and she's like, "Yeah, that's the best game PQ's played all year, bar none, not even close. So he was awesome. The speed that he plays with and his ability to chase some things down, major. But I'll tell you, the guy that you shouted out in the preview show that I came away just blown away at how good he is, Deshaun Elliott is freaking sick. That their safety number 25, that dude is all over the tape making plays, and it's tackles at the line of scrimmage with huge thump, the physicality, the speed. Like the good news is you're not going to face a lot of defenses, if any more defenses this year, that have guys that can do that. So it's not like schematically, although there were some things that Pittsburgh did very well that were smart to help limit the offense in multiple ways, you have to have the dudes to be able to do it. And Pittsburgh's dudes duded out in this game in such a major way that it doesn't actually scare me that much moving forward. Not that Washington's going to go put up 40 a game, but like what Pittsburgh did was fairly unique to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and again, like you mentioned, the personnel. Like there was a play where they're kind of in a what is it, a spread out formation. Tight end's off the ball to the right. They're running kind of like a wanda, so runs going to the right, tight end's going back to the left, and it looks like it's man coverage. And so what you're hoping is that Elliott would track with Zach as he goes back to sift, and you get it happens all the time. You get this huge gaping hole to the front side of the run because the player that's fitting the B gap is now actually the corner, and the corner doesn't recognize it until it's too late. And so instead of going with the motion, Elliott identifies the run from like 7 yards off, and he kind of starts going with the motion and just triggers downhill like an absolute maniac. Tackle for loss. Like, that's a big-time football play, and that was all over the tape. And you mentioned Queen. Like, I came into this game thinking, man, like, he really misses Roquan Smith. He's not playing as well, and he was an absolute nightmare. He's physical, downhill. He's running sideline to sideline. He's getting under stuff in coverage, which we have. He's like usually has a hard time with that, but he's getting great depth. So, just like the offense, you got to give them a lot of credit. You got to give a lot of credit to the defense in terms of how well they played. And we mentioned Cam Hayward. We mentioned Connor Benton. I cannot speak to how well those two guys played too. And it wasn't like Nick Allegretti played bad or Biotish played bad or Cosme played. Like, Cosme had some excellent blocks in this game. Those guys are just good players. Right. And it was like you're going to lose the whole reps. Defense felt that way. But
yeah. Okay, two elements specific to more schematic offense as a whole that I want to talk about before we get to Daniels and specific to his film breakdown. The first one is the running game. I would have expected a lot more Chris Rodriguez in this game, not necessarily just like on a personnel, like I love Chris Rodriguez, but like the types of runs that teams have gotten Pittsburgh on were a lot of the similar stuff that we would have expected Brian Robinson to run. Well, we learned Friday, after we had taped our preview, obviously, that B-Rob's not playing. And I'm like, well, just put Chris Rodriguez in on some of those and maybe you can hit a couple. He doesn't really play a ton. Obviously he's in at the drive at the end of the game. Bates has the hold, which is in part because of, not getting the help that he needs. But the run choices, kind of the run game in general, the execution. What did you make of how they ran the football, or more specifically, did not run the football very successfully in this game against, by the way, for context, of course, the second best run defense in EPA per play in the league. So we knew it would be tough sledding going in.
Yeah, I actually thought that first things first is that Pittsburgh had a really good plan for the run. And so what they did is they kind of were like, we're going to play an odd structure. So 3 guys inside and then 2 edge players on a lot of first downs, and then have Patrick Queen kind of be the extra guy in the middle, and then the safety is going to be the run support player. You can only do that if you play like pretty tight man coverage on the outside. So they were like, we're going to play pretty tight man on the outside. We're going to kind of play this heavier box, because like when you're in that odd structure, you can't get, so when you're running a Wanda run, you're always trying to get those 2 double teams inside to the linebackers. And in the 4 down front, you can, because the tight end can cut the backside guy out. The tackle reaches the front side guy. You get 2 double teams inside. So now you have 1 double team, and it's going to a player that's actually behind you in terms of where the run should be going. And so there's a lot of times where Patrick Queen, you just can't get the combination to him, and he's just going to run downhill and make the tackle. And so I thought that was a really good plan. Obviously there's a lot of pin pull stuff that the Commanders do, and it's the same type of thing. When you're in that structure, that kind of bear, jam-ish type structure, the combinations get a little bit weird. The pulls get a little bit harder. Like there's a little bit more noise and bodies there. And so they did a great job. and that only happens because you're in tight man coverage on the outside. So usually, I'm sure, like base that box structure, you're throwing bubbles, you're throwing quick screens, but because they're in tight man, you can't do it as well. So you're kind of forced into running into, I don't want to say bad looks, but looks that aren't great. Stuff you'd rather be throwing the ball against. So I think that's the first thing that sticks out to me. Just the plan was very good. The plan was good, and again, it kind of gets you out of stuff that's been excellent for us this year. So we can't run as much pin pull versus that. We can't run as much GT versus that, which is probably our best run. Wanda becomes a little bit more challenging, right? All those things that we've been really good at are now very, very hard. And so, McNichols is running into kind of some tough looks. Eckler's running into tough looks. And they just had the plan. And so I've been a part of games where that's happened, and you kind of are like, well, shoot, now what do we do? Because we weren't really prepped for this, and the stuff we have up isn't great versus this. And to your point, like they obviously kind of thought this would be a sub-run game, and based on what the Steelers did versus the New York Giants, I thought it was going to be a sub-run game too, but they were like, nah, we're not going to do that. We're going to kind of be who we are, stop the run, trust that we can press outside, and force you to kind of get into some stuff that you don't want to do, which they did a great job of.
Yeah, they definitely did. And obviously, we'll talk in a second about the quarterback run game element of that as well. The other thing, though, that you mentioned kind of in there is one of the potential solutions that has just turned in from a strength to like a nightmare the last couple of weeks is what is going on with the Commanders' screen game? Because they can't even on the running back screen. Well, one, like the wide receiver screens, we see the obvious confusion. Like Terry and Diami both going to catch the football. Like someone missed a call, someone missed something there. Doesn't take a genius. Doesn't take a guy who played 10 years in the NFL to tell you that got messed up. I got that one. I got that one under control over here. But it feels like in the last 2-3 weeks, Logan, they can't forget like bust a big play on one. They can't complete a running back screen to Austin Eckler. Like Jayden has just consistently dirted the football because he can't find Austin. And whether someone's seen something on tape that is tipping off these plays, whether it's Austin like running into guys and not kind of getting open, whether it's those guys or he's running into guys because they're getting blocked. Like, what is it with these running back screens that has caused that part of the Commanders game that was so good and so detail oriented earlier in the year and so successful to peter out and kind of die here?
Yeah, this is one, and again, it's not on all of them, but screens are incredibly detailed. Like in the run game, there's a certain level of detail. In the pass game, there's a lot of detail. But in the screen game, to get a good screen, a lot of people got to be doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so what I mean by that is like, in this game, for example, like Trent Scott is he's blocking TJ Watt. And so usually on a screen, you try to minimize that rusher. So either you encourage him to run up the field, right? Encourage him to run up the field, kind of past the quarterback or see the quarterback and get really deep. And then you replace that guy with the running back. The guard is working to the player that's got the running back in man, and the center is looking for anybody in pursuit. So you create like a little pocket for the back. You've outflanked the defense, ball out, right? The other way you do it is you have, when that rusher rushes, you get to his outside shoulder so that you kind of force an inside rush. The quarterback can vacate to the right, hit it to the back, same principle. And so one of the things that I noticed in this game with Trent Scott and TJ Watt is TJ Watt was pretty good on the screens about, hey, I'm going inside. And Trent Scott, when he gets that response, needs to clamp that outside shoulder. Just keep it covered up, let the back get out, and then throw the ball. But TJ Watt, like he was kind of, I guess what I'm saying, Trent Scott's kind of in between. He's like too square on him. So when TJ gets length, he can see the back and he just runs out and tackles him basically, right? And I think Jayden Daniels did a great job of being like, no, like dirt that ball because you're right there and I don't want to throw the pick, right? Then another one, it's kind of the same thing. Like the tackle does a good job and the pursuit is just crazy to the football. It's like crazy to the football. And the guy that's what I call the rat killer can't get out in time to kind of seal that off. And so I do think there's a couple things going on here. One, I think Kliff likes to call them in certain situations, kind of like fridge red zone, like he's going to call them. And I also think the execution, and so I think teams are kind of aware of that because we've been really good at them in the fringe red zone. So like in the scouting report, it's like, hey guys, remember, fringe
alert
red,
screen.
alert screen. And the other thing is the details have gotten a little bit harder to execute now because teams are aware of it. But I think when you look at Kansas City as an excellent screen running team, their details are always very good. And it's just, I think to me, it's about kind of reinforcing some of those details and then also maybe calling them in different situations than you would normally call them to kind of maximize those opportunities a little bit more.
Yeah, because I think the hard part about not having them is it is both easy completions and maybe like, okay, we only got 8 yards, but like, hey, an 8 yard gain's an 8 yard gain. Take that. But
Yeah.
it's also in a weird way a shot play. Like those can go for big gains, and so you're killing both things that will keep your offense on schedule. And even ahead of the chains, and also big play opportunities, and so they're extra hurtful when they don't work, and then you get stuck behind the chains, and it just feels like a waste of a play. So hopefully they can get that cleaned up. Anything else on either the run game or anything else from the offense that's non Jayden specific that we want to hit real quick?
Yeah, we talked about Trent Scott a little bit. I think it's important to point out that in pass protection, I thought he had a very competitive day. And I think he's a guy that we were all a little bit worried about. TJ Watt, and I think Kliff did a great job helping him out, but very, like, he did good testament to himself. I think one of the things that stuck out and something you talked about was like in the run game, just the relationship between him and Bates or him and Cosme was just not as sharp. And that's the issue, is you get a guy who's a pretty competitive football player, a guy that can come in and help you win a football game, but he doesn't have the same reps that Wiley has or Lucas has with that starting group. So I think that's where you saw a little bit of the friction. And talking about the run game, like, you see some of Coleman's inexperience. You see some of Trent Scott's lack of reps with the guys that he's working with, right? So all those things were kind of, I think, contributed. I think Pittsburgh did a good job, but those were two other variables that I think jumped out when you watch the film.
Yeah. Also, he's just not quite as powerful, and doesn't have quite the punch. So like on the Bates hold, he just doesn't get a good punch. And so John is like, his job is to hold until Bates can get there, and he doesn't do it. And so Bates is behind, and he winds up holding. And yeah,
well, that's what I'm talking about, like with the reps. So like that's one where I understand, like, hey, this is a tight 5, right? For me, I got to kind of take a more square step, and I can be patient to this linebacker running downhill. And so Wiley actually is really, really good in the run game because he's super bendy, he's super flexible, and he's quick. So like everyone thinks you got to be big, kind of hulking guy. The better guys are quick kind of wrestler types because I can ricochet block this 5 technique, and then I'm athletic enough when this linebacker triggers downhill to kind of get my hat across and be in the right position. And I felt like that's, again, where, and I'm not mad at Trent Scott because he just doesn't have the reps. Like, he's not going to take the reps with Bates because he's not going to play. And so I think that's where, again, like, you don't think about those things, but just those relationships and the timing of the run game becomes really, really important.